Energy Transmission Authority. As many of you may recall, but for the public and those of you who are new to our committee, this committee has oversight over the Renewable Energy Transmission Authority. And so in the interest of filling out that conversation, before we get to our report and review a study that I believe was recently completed by Rita, we're going to hear some testimony this morning regarding the status of renewable energy in New Mexico. And so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of, I believe this is our third meeting, Tom, or our second? This is our second meeting. How time flies. So this is, I'm going to call the second meeting of the NMFA Oversight Committee to order. Good morning, everyone. My name is, and for the public, my name is Senator Jacob R. Candelaria. I'm the chairman of this committee. I'm joined today by Representative Tomas Salazar, who is our vice chairman, as well as the members of our committee. Our first presentation this morning, members, will be testimony on the Energy Transition Act and renewable energy in New Mexico. With us on the call as panelists for this presentation, we have Sarah Cottrell Probst, who is our Secretary of Energy, Mineral, and Natural Resources Department. We also have Sayuri Yamada, Executive Director of Public Affairs for the Public Service Company of New Mexico. Ladies, the floor is yours at this point. I'll leave it to you to decide how you want to divide your time and proceed with your presentation. I want to thank both of you for being here today. Number one, members, we will go to questions and comments from committee members following this presentation before we proceed to the next presentation this morning, which will be regarding the Public Regulations Commission's adoption of the Energy Transition Act plan for the transition to 100% renewable energy for the electric system in New Mexico. So Secretary Probst and Ms. Yamada, the floor is yours. Thank you again for being here. Tom, we'll go ahead and members will go ahead and take action if we have to on the minutes from the last meeting. We'll take action on those after this 9 o'clock presentation. The last note I'll give you all is that I need to hop off the call at a point this morning due to a client matter. Representative Salazar will take over at that point.
Carrie, can you hold one moment, please? Thank you. Can you hold one moment? Thank you. I'm in a committee.
Okay, now, Senator Rodriguez, you probably want to mute your
Mr. Chairman, I am on mute. Yes, okay. Thank you. You know what? I am on mute, and I unmuted now, but I'm going to do it again. Let's see if it works.
Great. All right, folks. Well, Nancy, Senator Rodriguez, it's great to see you as always and your bright, smiling face. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Ms. Probst, our Secretary Probst, and Ms. Yamada, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen here. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee again. My name is Sarah Cottrell Probst. I'm the Secretary of the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department. And I'm going to provide a brief update on the Energy Transition Act, as well as some of the exciting developments in renewable energy, clean energy policy over the last year that flowed after the ETA was passed. It's a little intimidating to present about a bill to the chief sponsor, Mr. Chair, but as many of you may recall, the ETA included a number of very important components. The first was securitization. Also, it addressed replacement power for retiring coal plant assets. It addressed renewable energy and zero carbon standards. It included provisions for apprenticeships for replacement power going forward and for renewable energy for our union folks. And the bill included up to $40 million of community assistance funding from bond proceeds. The Public Regulation Commission, after the bill was passed, became the venue for considering many of the next steps like coal plant abandonment, securitization, and replacement power. And I think you're going to hear from Ms. Yamada about more specifics about how that's going. But that's a reminder about some of the main components of the ETA. diving in a little bit into the portfolio standards, the Act included a 40% renewable energy standard by 2025 for all utilities in the state and all co-ops, rising to 50% renewable energy by 2030. And the Public Regulation Commission oversees compliance for that. For the utilities, that standard rises to 80% renewable energy by 2040 and 100% zero carbon resources by 2045, as long as safety, reliability, and impacts to customer bills are considered. And that's important because ultimately the biggest problem that we're trying to solve for here is climate change. So while renewable energy, we want to grow that renewable energy economy in the state, ultimately we need to address climate and carbon emissions in the electric sector, and this Act does that. PNM has said publicly that they're going to meet that standard early, which is super exciting. I think it shows how doable the utilities feel this very ambitious Act is. For our rural electric cooperatives, the standard is 100% zero carbon resources a little bit later. They have a little more time by 2050. And the resources must be also composed of 80% renewables as long as it's technically feasible, the system's reliable, and it's not unaffordable. And after the ETA was passed, Tri-State, which is one of the biggest generation and transmission providers for many of the New Mexico co-ops, they came forward with a responsible energy plan that is very ambitious and completely tracks with the ETA. It is a plan that eliminates coal emissions in New Mexico and Colorado and transitions to renewables. So all of the utilities and co-ops and their providers are working really hard and planning towards the ETA's mandates. I don't want to get too far into the PRC process because I think Ms. Yamada is going to go there, but on July 29th of this year, the PRC unanimously approved a plan that would replace the electricity that PNM receives from San Juan Generating Station with 100% renewables. So progress is happening and the Commission has taken strong action. On the piece that the executive branch is responsible for, my department, the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, doesn't have an official role under the ETA. We're not called out specifically, but of course, as the state's energy department, we are keenly interested in making sure that everything's on track and what's happening with energy policy implementation in our state. So I talked to my colleagues at the Indian Affairs Department, Economic Development Department, and Department of Workforce Solutions, who do have specific roles under the Act. Were directed to convene community meetings and come up with plans for channeling the transition funding to the community. And they were on track to do so. They had a community meeting in person, which was very, very important. They had another one scheduled for April 2020, but that has been postponed due to the pandemic. Those three departments have been very involved in the state's COVID relief efforts. And the Navajo Nation itself, government was closed to in-person community meetings and essential services only. So community meetings haven't been prudent during this time, and they'll certainly resume those as soon as it's safe to do so. But in the meantime, their plan for continuing to make progress under the Act is to issue a request for information for economic development proposals to come in and gather good ideas. So they have not stopped due to the pandemic. They just are shifting their strategy to find ways to continue to make progress given these constraints and safety concerns. So what else is happening pursuant to the EPA? Well, the utilities around New Mexico are making progress across the board. These are a few examples of some of the new utility commitments on renewable energy and energy storage that have happened in the last month. So the La Jolla wind facility is one. It's in Torrance County. It's a 306 megawatt wind facility, and it's come online in late 2020, so this year. The power has been bought by PNM, and that's going to help both keep them on track towards meeting the ETA, and then there's a portion that's going to serve the Facebook data center in Los Lunas. The PRC has also approved construction of 2 new solar projects, including one with battery storage for El Paso Electric Company, and those are scheduled to come online in 2022. And then an example of co-op progress is Kit Carson Electric Co-op and Taos brought a new 3 megawatt solar array online on May 14th. And there's some more details here. I won't read you the whole slide. One milestone I wanted to note in terms of early results of the ETA is that utility scale generation in New Mexico, particularly of solar, has been increasing. And in March of this year, we saw renewable energy as a whole responsible for more than a third of the state's electricity generation. So as you may recall, the standard for 2020 is only 20%, but this means that the utilities at that moment in time were well ahead of that for March. And it was the highest level of generation for renewables ever recorded in the state. So we continue to make progress despite the pandemic and many other things that are happening around the world. Small scale solar, while it's not as specifically called out in the ETA, but small scale solar installations are also increasing in New Mexico. Between January and May 2020, New Mexico added 10,000 megawatt hours of small scale solar generation, and most of that was in the residential sector. We saw a dip during the pandemic, but the state's still experiencing growth in small scale solar installations. The legislature and the governor know that the ETA is nation leading. I mean, we are getting calls and queries from all over the country about the ETA, how other states could do something similar. But we didn't rest on that as the set it and forget it energy policy for the state. So this year in the 2020 session, you passed several very important additional pieces of legislation that that build on the ETA's great progress. And one of them is the solar market development tax credit. This is a personal income tax credit of up to $6,000 for residential and small scale commercial properties. It has an annual cap, so the cap is $8 million a year, and the bill sunsets in 2028. And we have Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department certifies those applications in terms of the system and making sure that the engineering and the estimates are correct before passing that on to the Tax and Rev Department. So we did our rulemaking this summer. The rule was finalized on August 25th, and we've started receiving applications. And so far, we've gotten 340 already for this year. And finally, I wanted to highlight the Grid Modernization Act that was passed this year, HB 233. I'm really excited about this one and the role that our department is playing in implementing it. This bill was born because recognizing that getting to the ambitious targets in the ETA will take some significant investments and improvements in the electricity transmission and distribution grid. And the bill does three things, largely speaking. One is that it charges our department with creating a grid modernization plan for New Mexico. So we've gotten right on that. We've convened a grid modernization advisory group of experts from around the state, national labs, universities, advocates, tribes, utilities, folks to help us on a number of topics. And we're going to be developing a series of white policy papers for public review and comment this fall on a bunch of topics related to grid modernization. And that's things like affordability, system efficiency, reliability, load adaptation, demand response, a lot of very wonky and technical things that are very, very important for grid modernization. So stay tuned for more updates on that in the future. The bill also created a fund and a grant program for innovative grid modernization pilot projects, and we're working on setting that up. Even though it doesn't have funding in it yet, we think we can pursue federal funding and hopefully other funds for that. And then it also has a piece that applies to the utilities regarding cost recovery with the PRC for grid modernization efforts. So Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation. I want to thank you for the opportunity to present today, and I'm glad to answer questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your time today and that presentation. We'll go ahead and go now, members, to Ms. Yamada from PNM for their part of the presentation, and then we will go to questions or comments from committee members. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Sayuri Yamada, the Executive Director of Public and Governmental Affairs for PNM. I have to say this is actually my first time I've done this WebEx kind of presentation. So bear with me as I'm kind of struggling through all the little pieces of, sharing screen. But at the request of Chairman Candelaria, I'm here to give you a quick update on PNM's piece of the implementation of the Energy Transition Act and what PNM is doing to help New Mexico move towards a clean energy future. As most of you know, the Energy Transition Act was a groundbreaking historic transition, making New Mexico one of the first few states to announce its sweeping clean energy goals, as Madam Secretary had mentioned earlier. And subsequently, many other states have been looking at New Mexico as a model, which means, as promised, New Mexico is already becoming a leader in the transition to clean energy. I don't have to tell you all, especially Chairman Candelaria, it's been a wild ride to get here. And when the PRC recently made the decision to go with 100% renewables in replacing our coal plant, it made the ride even wilder. As you can imagine, at first our engineers were kind of freaked out. My words, of course, not theirs. But after they got over the shock, they rolled up their sleeves and said, okay, this is our moonshot. Let's see how we're going to make this work. And that is what PNM is doing. In terms of what the future looks like after the closure of the San Juan coal plant in 2022, PNM will be replacing the full 560 megawatts of currently generated by the coal plant with 650 megawatts of solar and 300 megawatts of battery storage. At the request of the Commission, PNM is working on putting together a filing before the end of this month, providing the details on the 650 megawatt solar projects and the 300 megawatt of battery storage. I'm going to just share my screen real quickly just so you can kind of see what the breakdown on the amount and the location of the solar and battery storage projects look like. So I'm hoping I can do this. Let's see. Do this. Okay. Did I do that okay? Trying to see.
Yeah, we can see.
Can you see it? Okay. I think I lost everything here right now. So I'm hoping that's so you can see everything. Kind of. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. So looking at this, okay, sorry, I'm sorry, right back here, sorry. Okay, so I'm just, this is the solar and battery storage projects that PNM is looking to replace our coal plant with. And I kind of divided it up within the, what's in the Central Consolidated School District and what's outside of the Consolidated School District. So Consolidated School District, we're looking at about 300 megawatts of solar and about 130 megawatts of battery storage. And then outside of the Consolidated School District, we're looking at 350 megawatts of solar and 170 megawatts of battery storage. Outside is we're looking at McKinley County and Rio Arriba County. The chairman also asked to share some of the economic impacts from the Energy Transition Act. So the next slide shows some estimated economic development figures. Okay. PNMs will be making over a $1 billion initial capital investment, and all of these investments will be made with other solar developers. PNM will not be owning any solar or battery storage facilities. Now, the property tax figures paid by PNM after the closure of the San Juan coal plant for the first year is $3 million for the Consolidated School District. This is for the solar and the battery, and $2.3 million for the surrounding counties where the other projects are located. As you can see, the full term of property tax for the Consolidated School District is around $40 million, and the surrounding area is about $34 million. And these are just estimates based on some of the preliminary information that we're getting from our vendors. And of course, the final one will be submitted at the end of this month. So this is just giving a sneak peek at it, but these are still kind of estimated. We're looking at over 1 million construction job hours, which a majority of the construction is done by members of our communities. And after the construction of the solar and the battery storage facilities, are completed, there'll be between 16 to 28 permanent jobs in New Mexico. You know, I know it doesn't sound like very much compared to other scenarios we presented at the PRC, but it's going to take a little while to get there. I think we're on the right path, and this is definitely the more sustainable model, is looking at economic development moving forward. Hopefully, there'll be a decision by the end of the year from the PRC Commission to make our timeline to get these resources built and operating right before the closure of the San Juan coal plant. Let me just, I think I'm kind of done. I was trying to figure out how to, just lost. Okay. I was going to turn my screen off, share screen, but I can't seem to, must have lost all that stuff.
It's tricky. If you take your cursor up to the top of your screen, it usually pops down the controls again.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. Let me see. Okay. Let's see. Not getting that, but okay. Maybe I'll just I'll leave it on in case there's questions afterwards. So, you know, as mentioned, hopefully we hope to get a decision by the PRC to meet our timeline to get these resources built and operated right before the closure of the San Juan coal plant. And as you know, the securitization was also included, and within the securitization, there's approximately $20 million for the community fund, and an additional $20 million for the severance and training fund. Legislation required the disbursement of those community funds when the bonds are issued, which would be around June of 2022, to help assist the community of San Juan County. PNM is very much hoping and wanting to get 25% of the funding out before the bonds are issued around January of next year to help the community most impacted by the closure of the coal plant. Now, this was not a requirement in legislation, but a decision made by Pat Vincent-Colon, our president and CEO. She understands the need to make the transition to sustainable energy and the challenges to the community, the challenges community is going through right now, particularly in light of the current situation, and would like to see these funds get to the community earlier than 2022. Unfortunately, the early disbursement of these funds is temporarily delayed by an appeal filed by New Energy Economy and the Citizens for Fair Rates and Environment at the Supreme Court. Hopefully, the Supreme Court will be able to sort it all out so PNM can get the money out as quickly as possible to the people who need it. Now, PNM also completed all the legal requirements for the third party to manage and issue the severance and training fund. This fund would be available in mid-October to any of the coal miners who will be impacted, assuming, of course, the Supreme Court case is resolved prior to any layoffs. PNM is required every 3 years to put together an integrated resource plan that includes a 4-year action plan and a look at the energy needs over the next 20 years, which was due this year in July. And since a PRC decision on how we should replace the San Juan coal plant wasn't made until August, and given the scope of what we're working on, it's going to take a little longer than our traditional process. So PNM received an extension until early next year so we can incorporate the PRC's final decision on adding solar and battery storage. PNM's continue to work on the integrated resource plan and map out the energy resource allocations needed over the next 20 years. And in addition, we're looking at the types of infrastructure needed to meet our sustainable energy goals without compromising reliability, because it won't be very sustainable transition to clean energy if we can't keep the lights on. Now, our integrated resource planning process is open to the public and everyone in the community can participate. Obviously, it'd be a struggle to meet our clean energy goals without transmission and distribution infrastructure investments and new technology. To make that happen, PNM is planning to make $450 million investment over the next 5 years to build a reliable, secure, and sustainable grid. Believe it or not, even though we're well into the 21st century, PNM's system in New Mexico dates back to the 1960s and 70s, and we've been working to upgrade and update our system. Now we'll have to execute it at a faster pace to support the accelerated clean energy plan path forward. These investments will be made not just in our urban communities, but also our rural communities. And these investments will be delivering clean energy, enhancing customer service, and increasing grid resiliency. Now, to give you a flavor of what type of these investments will be made in each of the categories, here are some examples. As always, keep in mind, I'm not an engineer, but I'll do my best to kind of explain some of these examples. The grid was originally designed to handle steady increase of flow of baseload energy like coal and natural gas. But private rooftop solar, distributed storage, and electric vehicles were added to the grid. It created a different type of strain on the system. This can be alleviated through the expansion of existing substations with designs that will allow for more flexibility and expansion over time to be able to incorporate newer technology, and that is part of what PNM will be investing in. PNM will also be investing in enhancing customer service. In the original design, customers are typically served through a single feeder or a substation, which increases the time it takes to restore power during an outage. By rebuilding these feeders and integrating new technology, PNM engineers can better pinpoint the causes of these outages and redirect the power through different paths to restore service faster. Now, another area in what PNM will be investing is increasing grid resiliency. PNM is looking to implement broader upgrades and redesign in urban and rural communities. It will provide a redundancy to the grid design that makes it better equipped to respond to an infrastructure system that will deliver our clean energy future and help grow our economy by building a sustainable, secure, and reliable grid. PNM is doing everything we can to rise to the challenge of making this historic transition to sustainable energy. One of the common benefits of the Energy Transition Act is the opportunity to make New Mexico a leader in clean energy. And I cannot even begin to tell you how proud I am to tell you what's been happening, that is happening as we speak, as Secretary Cottrell Props has mentioned. Finally, as we work to turn New Mexico into a 100% clean energy state, one of the things to keep a close eye on as we move into 2021 legislative session is to look at any new energy legislation and policy through the lens of whether it will complement or impede the goal of the Energy Transition Act. Now, to that end, PNM is participating in the Grid Modernization Task Force to help map out the steps needed to modernize our grid. And thank you very much, Madam Secretary, for taking the lead on this, because this is really, really important, and it's crucial in meeting, our state's clean energy goal, because we really need to work on the foundation, which is the grid, to be able to, expedite and accelerate our state's clean energy future. PNM is also participating in the community solar legislation stakeholder process under the leadership of Representative Roybal Caballero. So it's great to see you here today, and Senator Stefanix. Community solar can potentially play an important role in the transition to sustainable energy if it plays nice with the Energy Transition Act and truly helps us meet our sustainable goals. We have a ways to go, but I'm optimistic that we will get it done. This is a very exciting time to be able to shape New Mexico's clean energy future. PNM is 100% committed to our 100% sustainable energy goals, while, as always, continuing to keep the lights on. So now again, I'm happy to answer any questions, but bear in mind, I'm not an engineer. And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me an opportunity to talk about this and also go down memory lane about over the last 2 years. And thank you very much for your leadership in getting this historic monumental piece of legislation passed. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank both of you for the excellent information, and to see how quickly stakeholders across the spectrum and all those who are involved in this, including our partners in the oil and gas industry, who remain an important piece of New Mexico's energy mix, to achieve an all of the above energy strategy takes everybody rolling up their sleeves. So we really appreciate the time for PNM that you've made, and the depth of information, Ms. Yamada, you've provided, as well as you, Secretary. So thank you. Members, we're going to go ahead and go to questions or comments from committee members. First on my list is Representative Salazar. Before I go to you, Representative, and members, as I mentioned at the beginning, unfortunately at 10 o'clock, I need to step away from the committee for a moment. So Representative Salazar, beginning at 10, I'm going to ask you per my text last night, if you can go ahead and step in as chairman. So with that, Representative Salazar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the great presentation, Secretary Probst and Executive Director Yamada. I'm having a little bit difficulty with bandwidth here where I live. So again, if something doesn't come through, please let me know. While I probably have a lot of questions, first of all, to you, Mr. Chair, I totally appreciate your ability to actually get these 1, 2, 3, 4 testimony as part of our agenda. So it may very well be that some of what I might ask or comment about might be covered later. I'll try as much as possible to that not be the case. So I will keep my question and comments rather brief. It's, I might just comment on certainly the support of the ETA in terms of the legislation that came through. Sometimes things that I read about may in fact probably fall in the category of being directed to media based on kind of political interests. Forgive me, because I normally don't operate looking at things that manner. But let me just kind of bring a few things that probably are things that enter my mind because of the fact, for example, that I represent a rather rural area. So I will start off and essentially we're aware, for example, that in California, the role that California has played relative to renewables is extremely significant, and they probably have set a higher standard, or at least a standard that they're trying to get at quicker than New Mexico has. So a general statement. But I think in particular, one of the things that has been of concern, or that I look with a little bit of concern, is California is experiencing electricity shortages, probably due to the heat waves that hit the state and so on. I think in part, there has been at least an indication that in part of that shortage of electricity, some of it is attributed to the fact that California has an aggressive renewable energy a plan in place. So let me just stop there because there's not a question there. I do know that there are some comments made relative to battery technology. I do appreciate the comments that were made by Executive Director Yamada regarding battery technology. Also, the comments that were made by Secretary Probst in terms of the PRC and a reference specifically to Kit Carson. So let me do get to a question, and the question actually resides relative to El Paso Electric. So I would probably want someone to comment a little bit on El Paso Electric. As far as I understand, El Paso Electric kind of is basically the agency that provides electricity for Las Cruces in that general area. Yet, if I take a look at this particular case, only about 2.8% of the overall mix comes from renewable. And I guess in part, that to me poses a little bit of a challenge in terms of how we get to where we want to get in terms of the goals that we've established for New Mexico or for entities supporting New Mexico. Connected to that, and then I'm going to stop and just let the presenters, the panel people maybe react to both of these, is there were comments made relative to tri-state. Now, please understand that some of this information that I mentioned may in fact be dated because I collect information that I believe will be significant relative to the interim. So it's part of the situation may very well be that some of this is dated information. I think in part, one of the challenges of tri-state, there are two things. Number one, I think that the comment about tri-state moving aggressively towards replacing coal generation with renewables is very good news. I am aware, again, like I said before, and this information would be dated, that out of co-ops, 19 co-ops that I'm aware of them, 11 of them still depend on Tri-State. And so to go further, basically the idea is the following. Given that there are huge costs for Tri-State in terms of the transition from coal to renewables, I guess in some way or other, I'm a little bit concerned about their progress in moving in that direction. If I understand correctly, and I'm not aware of what this annual, the 68th annual meeting that took place in April, what Tri-State was able to assure members of co-ops in terms of this movement, my question basically is the following. Regarding Tri-State, how far along are they, or how well are they moving along relative to their intent to actually replace coal generation? And that's specific to Tri-State. Mr. Chair, I apologize for the wordiness. Secretary Probst and Executive Director Yamada, I hope that what I am asking about is clear, and if you could comment on that, I would appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, this is Secretary Cottrell Probst. I'm glad to take a first pass at that. Representative Salazar, thank you for your comments and for your questions. With regard to El Paso Electric, and they are working to catch up. As I noted, they have had 250 megawatts of solar, one with battery storage, approved by the PRC, and that's going to come online in 2022, and that should give them a big jump up in terms of their percentage and their progress towards complying with the ETA. So they're working on it. And with regard to Tri-State, it's hard to overstate the sort of sea change in Tri-State's attitude and approach to electric supply over the last couple of years. Tri-State hired a new executive director, or I'm not sure what his title is, CEO, Dwayne Hiley, in April of last year. And so he came on board right after we had already passed our legislation. And part of his task was to really reorient Tri-State towards the future. And one of the things that they undertook was this responsible energy plan effort. They knew that they had several co-ops who were seeking, Kit Carson left their system, but they had several other co-ops in Colorado and maybe one in New Mexico that were exploring leaving Tri-State altogether because they were so frustrated with a number of things, the contract situation, as well as their reluctance to move towards cleaner energy generation. And so Tri-State, it was kind of painful for them, but they've undertaken a process to really come up with a plan to comply with both New Mexico and Colorado statutes while making sure that reliability and affordability are central, because they know that a lot of their customers, ultimate co-op customers, are in very rural areas. That's the whole nature of co-ops in their history. So this responsible energy plan, Tri-State pulled together a multi-state group of folks from every single state that they serve and the co-ops that they serve, and got input on this responsible energy plan. I participated in that effort along with Kevin Gronwald from the Rural Electric Co-op Association from New Mexico, and Chancellor Arvizu from New Mexico State University, who is also the former head of the National Renewable Energy Lab. And so they pulled together similar folks from all the different states and really started looking at their system, their resources, and what they were doing. And they concluded that many of their coal resources, not all of them, but most of them, were uneconomic compared to renewable energy and replacement power. And so I'm not going to say that everything is fixed and we should forget about it because we always have to make sure everybody's continuing to make progress. But I really think that responsible energy plan that Tri-State has developed is moving them more in the right direction in terms of their environmental profile, their costs, and their customer service. I can't speak a whole lot more because I just don't know about where they are in that discussion about the contracts between Tri-State and the co-ops, but that's what I can tell you about their pivot towards a much cleaner electricity generation profile.
Thank you very much for that, Secretary. Executive Director Yamada, do you have any comment you would like to make?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative. Yeah, I will see, moving towards, this clean energy and adding a lot of the renewables on our system is a challenge. But the real key is, as we move forward, is really creating a robust infrastructure that is capable and available to be able to really incorporate a lot of this renewables. As we all know, our state, we're incredibly blessed with lots of, sun and wind, and we have a great opportunity to grow our economy through that. So we're very excited about the Secretary's Grid Modernization Task Force, because that really is the next key. And through the Energy Transition Act, what's wonderful about it is really creates that kind of glide path forward. So how do we incrementally make these changes to reach the 100% clean energy goal? You briefly mentioned California, and that is a question we have been getting from many of our stakeholders. And you're absolutely correct. It was somewhat of a perfect storm, really due to those increased temperatures in over the hundreds in California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico. We're looking at resource adequacy problems. So I think we can learn a lot from what had happened in California, and by taking these proactive steps to prevent sufficient resource adequacy, the types and amount, as well as really strengthening our transmission distribution system is going to be really, really critical. And really just, it's prudent planning. And that's what we're doing right now, is really looking at over the next 4 to 20 years of how do we plan appropriately from resources to infrastructure. So thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. If I may, I have one more question, if I might proceed.
Absolutely, Mr. Vice Chair. Okay,
Secretary Probst, let me just return to something, and it's perfect. An answer like, I'm not privy to that information is certainly in order at times, because we might ask questions, for example, that don't apply directly to the work that you do. As far as I know, and this number might have changed, 11 of the state's 19 electric co-ops continue to buy power from Tri-State. Forgive me for beating up on Tri-State. One that is not included in that you mentioned was Kit Carson. You did mention Kevin Grosenwald, General Manager and CEO of the New Mexico Rural Electric Co-op Association, as making a statement of the following type: that the jury is still out as to whether Kit Carson will actually achieve the cost savings it's projecting. Do you have any idea? And by the way, Kit Carson has always been impressive to me of late, because of all the work that they're doing and so on. So in this particular case, do you have any idea of how Kit Carson might be faring relative to the decision that they made in terms of going in partnership with Guzman? Any thoughts about that, Secretary?
Mr. Chair and Representative Salazar, you're right. Kit Carson has been a leader for many, many years on clean energy, and it's always hard to be a pioneer and test things out and go first and try things and be the first. That's always really tricky. I have a lot of respect for Luis Reyes and the team at Kit Carson, and I haven't caught up with him in a while, but they've continued to double down on their solar investments, adding to their system. They've added some more this May. They added some more megawatts, 3 more megawatts to their system. You're right. They are procuring what power they're not self-generating. They're procuring through Guzman Energy. I think that's been cost effective for them, but Kit Carson are always looking for ways to improve, and I think it would be really interesting to hear from Mr. Reyes about where all that stands, because I haven't talked to him in probably a month or so, but I do think they've been satisfied with that arrangement with Guzman so far, as best I know.
Madam Secretary, thank you very much for that, and thank you, Executive Director Yamada. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Next, and Representative, if you could remember to bring down your hand, your little hand at this point. Next, going on my list to Senator Richard Martinez. Senator Martinez.
Thank you. This is Senator Martinez. I was trying to find the unmute button, so I found it though. First of all, I don't really have a question, but I do want to thank Secretary Probst and Executive Director Yamada for the presentation. I thought it was great. I just wanted to announce that the co-op that I reside in is also doing some great things. They've done an array in Alcalde, a huge array, solar array, and recently they just did one up in El Rito at the Northern New Mexico campus. So they're moving forward. Also, 2 weeks ago, I had a solar system installed in my residence. Last week or Thursday, the state inspector was present and he inspected it. So I'm waiting for the Jemez Electric Co-op to come put my meter. So we're scheduled for Tuesday the 22nd. So I should be on the grid by the 22nd of next week. So I'm really excited about that. And I just want to thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I believe Representative Garcia had his hand up also. I don't know if he had the little hand, but I know he was waving at you. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you, Senator. Going to next on my list, you are correct, Senator, is Representative Harry Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. My name is Harry Garcia. I represent House District 69. I got a couple of questions and a couple of concerns. Number one question is on that flyer, on that presentation you put. Thanks for the presentation anyway. It's a real good one. You put that a full term was $40 million. What did you mean by that? Was that the whole tax base that they're going to pay out on this system, or can you explain that to me?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative, the full term is solar panels have a 20-year depreciation rate. So over the 20-year period, it's kind of the cumulative over that time period, how much property taxes each one of those communities would receive.
And Mr. Chairman and young lady, in other words, that's to be bottom line of what they receive off this solar panel, off the solar system.
Correct.
$40 million. Okay,
yes.
What happens after that term is up?
The battery is typically fully depreciated at that time. So, you know, my understanding is at the full term of the depreciation, that is the amount we'll have to see battery, you know, where they will be after the 20-year of the full term of depreciation.
Mr. Chair, I understand what you're saying, but are you telling me at the end of the 40 years, there will be no more taxes paid to these communities? Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, from accounting perspective, that is correct.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that. I have another question, Mr. Chairman. You said that they will create 26 jobs at the end of the construction part of the solar farm or wind farm or whatever you're doing. But on the paper, it says 12 to 14 jobs, and then you turn around and you said 26 jobs. Which is it, 12, 14, or 26?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, these are just estimated amounts, so it's kind of a range around there. It's probably a little unclear until once they get operated, and these are based on numbers that we're receiving from our vendors. So this is what they're anticipating in 2022, what that might look like and moving forward.
Mr. Chairman, Madam, thanks for that. And the reason I'm asking that question is we have a solar farm in my community, which is Red Mesa Wind Farm, and it hires a whole 2 people.
Yes.
And the problem we're having with that, Mr. Chairman and young lady, is that the people that is hiring are not from our community. Out of state or somewhere else. And these are big issues. because the state's funding some of this stuff and we're not getting no return on our people that need it, and it's going somewhere else. Okay, now the next question, these people that you're going to hire after it's done, where are they going to come from?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, we consider these permanent jobs, so I think either they're hired locally or maybe they're people that from out of state that come here and move. But like I said, we don't have all that information because that really will be up to the individual solar developers who own the facility.
Mr. Chairman and young lady, just to what you just finished saying, that is the whole reason for my question is because you don't know where these people are coming from. We need to know these things because we cannot afford to be putting all this money, state money, into these projects, and we're hiring people from out of state to run these projects after they're done. And that's what's happening in the wind farm in Grants, New Mexico. The people that are running it now are not even from here. So the state invested a bunch of money, Mr. Chair, and we're not getting no returns on it. And what I mean by returns is we need to hire local people to run these things afterwards. We're hiring local people to build them. Yes, we are. But that's just very temporary. I think maybe 6 months, maybe a year at the most. One more question, Mr. Chair and young lady. How long do you anticipate for the state to get reimbursement for what they're investing in these projects?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, can you clarify the question regarding the investment the state will be making?
Yes, Mr. Chair, or maybe I'm wrong on this one, okay? How much money is the state investing on these solar farms that you're talking about right now?
Mr. Chairman, and represent the investment that is mentioned here, the capital investment, about $1 billion. That's the investment that PNM will be making to build these facilities.
Is there any state money involved in this?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, no, this is all private money.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have for right now.
Thank you, Representative Garcia. Any other members of the committee wish to ask any questions before we move on to the next presentation? Senator Griggs. So at this point, members, I'm going to go ahead and ask that Representative Salazar take over as chairman for approximately the next hour. I will rejoin you at that time. And so before I turn it over, Senator Griggs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to ask, say, Yuri, if she could talk a little bit about this summer, when PNM was concerned about not having enough power to provide, service during the heat spells that we had, and to talk about where we think we're going in order to be able to address those sorts of things that, certainly could happen any year and at any time when renewables, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine stuff. I've heard that, they're talking about some battery storage in some of that, but that battery storage may not be near tough enough to handle all we're talking about. So I'd just like to have her talk a little bit about how PNM plans to address those issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and great to see you, Senator. Yeah, you're absolutely right, because, it won't be a sustainable transition to clean energy if we can't really keep the lights on. So reliable power and reliable resource is very, very critical, and it's something that we're looking at. We are going to have to look at some type of more of a reliable baseload resource, complementing it with new technology and battery storage. So that is something we're incredibly mindful of as we're working on this resource planning and what this resource mix will look like. Some of you probably know that we are planning to not renew our nuclear Palo Verde generating stations lease. And because of that, recently in June, we put out an RFP for replacement power on that. So as we look through that, we'll also be looking at, the reliability factor and resource adequacy as we make those decisions of, how we replace our resources.
Sayuri, thanks for that. And I think, members of the committee, everybody needs to be aware, of course, that, New Mexico is blessed with sun and wind, but we're also blessed with things like natural gas, which, is very, very clean. Now there's, it comes with its sets of issues as well, but, you can have it when you need to turn the lights on. I mean, it's available, and I don't know where P&M, as far as natural gas plants or stuff is going on, but those are things that are available in our state right now that can help keep costs down and provide immediate power when necessary. So, Sayuri, are we looking at any fossil fuels, or are we just trying to stay completely away from that?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Griggs, yes, we're going to have to look at some type of clean and natural gas for the short-term period as we're going through this transition and technology catches up and we see newer, cleaner resources. But you're absolutely right. That is something, as you probably remember, as you probably know, P&M's original plan was just, a little bit of natural gas with a combination of solar and battery storage. So, we'll see what types of proposals that we receive and what mix will work out best for, the long-term New Mexico, keeping in mind this reliability piece of it as well.
And Sayuri, thanks for that again, because the reliability, of course, is critical. But then I think there's things that we need to look into as well, because when we start talking about the battery storage, batteries have a lifetime. Maybe they can then be recycled. Maybe they can't. They'll have to be disposed of, and the disposal of those batteries may create a different challenge for supporters of renewables and going to 100% renewables, because those things have they've got stuff in them that's not necessarily the greatest of stuff. So I think we need to start now evaluating how much of a challenge that's going to be, and what our intention will be to take care of solar panels, take care of solar batteries when they reach their life, which may be 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe longer, but at some point it ends. So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Sayuri, thank you for all of that. And I hope as we're moving down this road, we look at all the challenges that we're faced with. So thank all of you, and thank you, Sayuri.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Up next is Senator Sanchez. Your questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to Sayuri, and thank you, Secretary and Sayuri, for your presentations. My question to you, Sayuri and Secretary, you mentioned that no private money it's all private money going into this. How much are these private companies receiving in tax credits for these solar farms, for the wind farms and all that? How much are they receiving in tax credits or any other benefit?
Madam Secretary may have a better, more of an exact number, but as we all know, at the federal level, they do receive some tax benefits for these the renewables. So, that is taken into consideration, yes, when they when they build these out.
Okay, thank you, Secretary. Do you have anything to add to that? Are there any state tax credits that are being received on this?
Mr. Chair and Senator Sanchez, I'm not aware of any state tax credits that they're going to get, but Sayuri is right that the federal solar investment tax credit would be available to these projects. It's been on a decreasing amount. Congress has sort of phased that down year by year, so it depends on when they come online, what the level of the credit is. But our state utility scale production tax credits for renewables sunset a couple of years ago.
Well, that's correct. So I know there was a push to renew those. Is there going to be a push to renew those again? Are you aware
Mr. Chair
of
and Senator Sanchez,
legislation?
no, sir, not given the current state fiscal situation. And frankly, the industry, the renewable energy industry, is not really asking for that. We're looking at other things like the legislation that this body passed this year on the IRBs for transmission, other ways to sort of unlock that economic development in the state rather than straight up tax credit for utility scale renewables.
Okay, thank you. I think going to clean energy is good, but I think we need an energy policy that includes all of the above, whether it be renewables, fossil fuel, etc., because of the reliability. And also in that energy policy needs to be on storage or disposal and advancement or of backup energy, whether it be batteries and that or whatever we use, but other areas that we need to look at, to have reliability on the grid for the consumer out there, because we don't need to have shutdowns and brownouts or blackouts, brownouts. We've been having a lot of them here in our area recently. I don't know what the reason for that is, and we're with a co-op here. When it comes to Tri-State, I will never ever believe another thing that Tri-State says, because they sat in the committee, corporations and transportation, and flat out lied to the committee that they said they will not shut down for 5 to 10 years, most likely 10, and they turn around and shut down right away. And that has devastated our community. That has killed about 120 jobs. It's killing, they're laying off our coal miners now. Everyone in the Rio Grande Corridor, they have no idea what is done to us. And also what, now that we have a refinery closing down, Marathon. This is what people rely on to feed their families, to pay their mortgages, whatever they need to do to run their families. And I'm sorry, but people along the Rio Grande Corridor have no idea what this does to the rural communities. The rural communities are suffering right now. And it's very upsetting to me, because I see these families. I mean, we've got so much with this COVID-19 going on, not only our economy, our education system's a disaster right now, the way we're handling it, when it comes to the local school districts. But it's devastating. How many, and I don't know who can answer this, but how many legislators are benefiting from leases on their properties to put these wind farms in? Does anybody want to
Mr.
answer
Chair
that?
and Senator Sanchez, I have no idea. I'm sorry.
You have no idea that there's legislators, even though you know, for one, that recused themselves because they leased to property to them?
Mr. Chair, Senator Sanchez, you asked how many, and I don't know how many. I am aware that there are some, you're right, but I don't know how many in total.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Secretary. I think you're doing a great job there. It's just that it's very upsetting to me here that we have communities that are being destroyed by not having a backup for employment and that in our areas, in the rural communities. I understand. I agree that we need to have a clean energy. We need to have clean energy, but let's do it a little more methodically and not destroy families while we're in the process of doing that. But I do understand that, but we need to put an energy plan that includes all the above and which includes, what are we going to do when these communities get hurt? When my community here in Grants and Cibola County was damaged when uranium mining went away. And to me, that's one of the cleaner energies out there. Now, I think it's dangerous, but I think times have changed. And I worked in the uranium mine. So I know what it did for me to help me with going to school and that. But I just think we need to look. I think your department secretary, along with the legislators, the executive, need to look at an energy plan that helps with moving towards a clean energy, but not devastating these communities as much as it has. When it comes to Tri-State, Tri-State is owned by all the co-ops. When I say all the co-ops, not just New Mexico, there's some in Colorado, Nebraska, maybe Kansas. They own Tri-State. The co-ops are owned by members of that co-op, which are like myself, in Cano Levi, Representative Garcia. We're the owners of that co-op, and so when I say Tri-State, I won't believe anything they say anymore, because they sat in that committee and lied, and I have, and you can go back and look at the videos on that. So anyway, with that, Secretary, I think you're doing a great job. Thank you for your presentation, and Sayuri, thank you for yours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sanchez. Any comments? I believe I interrupted someone. Someone was about ready to make a comment. One of the presenters? Okay. In fact, let me see if I don't find anybody else who has raised their hand. Are there any additional questions to be asked by any of the members? Hearing none, then in this particular case, what I would like to do is I would like to thank Secretary Probst, as well as Executive Director Yamada, for their presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you. What we need to do now is we need to get onto the second item in our agenda. The title of the presentation is Testimony on Public Regulation Commission Adoption of the Energy Transition Act Plan. We have two presenters, and I will ensure the staff have these people online for them to start. It's Noah Long, Senior Attorney, Natural Resources Defense Counsel, and Kelly O'Donnell, economist and public finance expert. If you two folks are online, I will leave it up to you to decide what order your presentations will be in. So again, Tom or Erwin, let's make sure that we get these presenters on and ready to go.
Mr. Chair, I believe that both Kelly and Noah have been moved to the panelists. So they would just need to unmute themselves and turn on their cameras.
Okay.
All right. Can you hear me? This is Noah Long.
Okay, this is Representative Tomas Salazar. I actually serve as vice chair. Chairman Candelaria has stepped away for a bit. But again, as I indicated, two things. Number one, thank you very much and welcome to both of you for coming before our committee. We surely are grateful that we can use people with your expertise to come before our committee to, number one, do presentations, and secondly, to go ahead and answer questions and or listen to comments the committee members might have. So again, as I indicated initially, I will leave it up to you to decide what order you will go in. And with that said, we're ready to hear from both of these panelists.
Thank you, Representative Salazar, and to the Chairman Salazar and the committee. This is Noah Long from the Natural Resources Defense Council. I think Kelly and I have agreed that I'll go first, and I'll try to be relatively brief, leave lots of time for questions and answers. I'd like to thank the committee and all of you, and also to Ms. Yamada for making sure that I'm not the only one new to presenting on a committee via WebEx. So if I mess up in terms of presenting my slides or otherwise, I'm not alone. And I hope you'll grant me some patience there. I'll try here to figure out how to share my screen for sharing a few slides. Let's see. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
Great. Glad to hear it. So, like I said, Chairman Salazar and members of the committee, my name is Noah Long. I'm with the Natural Resources Defense Council. We're a national nonprofit environmental organization founded 50 years ago to defend the environment and natural resources. I'm a New Mexican and have been working here in New Mexico on these issues for the last 7 years, including the honor of being able to be involved in the Energy Transition Act. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. And my presentation is going to be a little bit different than the ones you've heard already, and the ones I think you'll be hearing from Kelly O'Donnell and others. Because I saw who else was invited, and I knew that you'd be hearing a lot of detail on the course and successful implementation of the ETA, I decided to move and go ahead and present a bit on that, but also on the opportunity that I see that the ETA is opening up for New Mexico to move from to a 100% clean economy. And so I hope you'll grant me leave to take a few points on that. Before I start with that presentation, though, I'd just like to mention a couple of things based on the previous presentations. I know there were some questions and comments about this heat wave that we faced this summer here in New Mexico and across the whole West, and the reliability concerns that were brought about by that heat wave. And I'd like to just note a couple of things that we've looked at in accordance with that. One, it was a west-wide heat wave. The Western United States is on a single connected grid, although there are a whole bunch of coordinators, actually 38 grid managers, including PNM and others, across that Western grid. And unlike almost all heat events, it was extraordinarily hot and extraordinarily widespread. So the power sector was under immense crunch all over the West. And the question really was one of resource adequacy, as Ms. Yamada mentioned. And the question really whether the entire West, across all resources, fossil resources, renewable resources, storage resources, hydro, et cetera, whether there was enough to keep the lights on across the whole West facing these really extraordinarily high temperatures. And it was, I think, maybe the worst event in about 15 years, since 2006. The California agencies where the worst of that happened, the three energy agencies coordinated a quick analysis of that heat wave event and the unfortunate, although temporary, rolling blackouts that were caused by it, and determined that the question really was one of resource adequacy and adequate procurement requirements on the large number of utility and other energy provider entities in California. And I imagine there'll be significant reform pushing forward for better procurement policies and better procurement requirements. And while there has been political chatter about that being caused by renewable energy, I think all of the evidence so far points to that not being the source. Then moving on to the Energy Transition Act. if I may, I'll note a couple of things, and I think Ms. O'Donnell's presentations, the presentation already from Secretary Probst, really highlight that this act has been and it continues to be successfully implemented. While there's certainly road bumps ahead, including the unfortunate challenge still being heard at the Supreme Court, the PRC has approved the financing order, has approved the abandonment of the San Juan resource by PNM, and has approved 100% clean, competitively sourced replacement mix for the San Juan facility. That includes, as was mentioned, significant amounts of new solar and wind, as well as storage. And I think also importantly is additional demand response resources. And demand response resources allow the utility to call on customers on a voluntary basis to use less electricity and get compensated for that when it's cheaper to do that than to bring on new peaking resources. So I think that's an important opportunity and really sort of an indication of the flexibility and new management that we'll be needing to see of the grid over the coming decades. As I said, I view the success of the ETA as really a prelude to the possibilities for moving New Mexico to a clean economy. And if I can figure out how to advance my slides, here we go. As I said, the ETA really relied on the expectation that switching to renewable energy would bring out economic benefits. And there were a number of studies before the ETA was passed that indicated that that was the case. And so far, we're seeing that bear out with the facts. And I believe Ms. O'Donnell's analysis will be relevant here, and we'll talk about that more coming up. But with the success of the ETA that we're seeing already, I think it's time for the state, particularly given the enormous challenge of climate change that we face, to think about transitioning the entire economy to clean energy. And I'm excited to say that NRDC is part of a consortium led by Evolved Energy Research that's looking at the opportunities for New Mexico to transition to a full clean economy. And what we've seen already, the full results will be available later this fall. But I was authorized here to provide sort of a teaser of just a few slides that show, I think, some exciting opportunities for us to move in that direction. So as I mentioned, in 2018, the firm ICF was retained by NRDC and others to do some analysis of what a 50% renewable energy standard would look like. It looked like what we saw was significant new investments and significant new job opportunities in renewable energy. More research has been done by Renewable Energy Transmission Authority just this past year that shows even more renewable energy possibilities here in the state, with really significant investment in the state and opportunities coming from that. Ms. O'Donnell's study talks about the specific replacement resources that were approved by the PRC, and she'll be talking about that. And then the second column, and sorry to take them out of order here, but the second column refers to this new analysis from Evolved Research and the opportunities for even more renewable energy investment to shift the entire economy across all sectors, transportation, buildings, and industry, to rely on clean energy sourced here in New Mexico. And I think, like I said, there's a lot to discuss in that analysis, and I'm hoping there'll be opportunities for the leaders that to present to this committee and others in the coming over the coming months. But today I'll just provide a little teaser, and I think the good news here is that what we're seeing is that the costs of that transition, and by transition I'm referring to eliminating carbon pollution for the purposes of providing transportation, switching to fully clean energy sources for transportation, buildings, and industry. The cost of that across all sectors are really manageable and virtually flat. The reference case is a business as usual case. Pollution continues to increase, and the core scenario is a deep decarbonization, reaching 50% pollution reduction by 2030 and zero carbon by 2050. And in that scenario, we see nearly flat costs and even costs. In some cases, as I'll discuss, lower costs than that reference scenario. Here, you'll also note I changed slide colors just to make sure you're all still awake on these long video conferences. Oh, and I should mention, and sorry to take this a bit out of order as well, but I should mention that this analysis, the forthcoming analysis led by Evolved Research, includes other researchers as well, and will include equity analysis, pollution impacts on New Mexicans from these various trajectories, as well as forthcoming jobs. Today, I'll just be taking a look at a couple of the costs items. So here, for household energy, it's a similar story, just a deeper dive. Household energy costs relatively flat from the reference or business as usual scenario where pollution continues to increase in the state, and the core scenario, which is the sort of middle case for achieving 50% reductions by 2030 across all sectors, and the low demand scenario, which is really led by energy efficiency. And there we see a slight increase, a few dollars a month by 2030, followed by a decrease in costs for New Mexicans beyond. And so I think that's really a good news story. Of course, on top of that, just from the power sector alone, an additional $60 million a year by 2030 in health benefits. And I think everybody's been reading the news and seeing how the West has been just enveloped by these wildfires, following the heat wave we saw in August. And I think it should be news to nobody that these are just the tip of the iceberg of the kinds of benefits we'll see by avoiding the worst effects of climate change. So here I'll just mention one other piece, which I think is really interesting and important, and I just sort of, again, a teaser for further conversation on this month. But I think today we'll be focusing almost entirely on renewable energy. New Mexico, of course, has enormous renewable energy resources, among the best in the country, and frankly, among the best in the world. What we talk about less, and I think is often left out, not just here in New Mexico, but elsewhere, is the important resource of energy efficiency and the real job benefits and economic benefits that come with it. And I think here I'll just mention that to achieve these kinds of reductions, we're going to have to improve the performance of buildings here in New Mexico. And that will require an immense workforce, a skilled workforce that really can't be outsourced and is here in the state. And those investments will lead to lower energy bills for New Mexicans, which can be reinvested in the things that we need to cover here in the state, whether it's making sure our kids have adequate childcare, investing in our own education, supporting local businesses, and ensuring that we all have adequate health care. I think we'd all rather be paying that than paying higher energy bills. And as I said, the result would be a necessary skilled labor force to make sure that we are making those investments and improving the performance of buildings here in the state. With that, I will close and thank the committee. I know I took us a bit afield from just the implementation of the Energy Transition Act, but I'll thank my co-presenters both on this panel and the previous panel and the next panel for providing a whole lot of detailed information on that. Of course, happy to take questions from the committee, and thank you again for your. Now I'll try to figure out how to stop sharing if I can.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. O'Donnell. Ms. O'Donnell.
Hi. Is it time for me to start?
Yes.
Okay. I gotta wait for Noah to stop sharing. There we go. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Can everybody hear me? Oh, yes. Okay, good. Thank you. Appreciate those thumbs up. My name is Kelly O'Donnell. I am an economist here in New Mexico. I have a doctorate in economics from UNM. I've been working in and around public policy in the state for almost 25 years now. My primary areas of expertise are in tax policy and economic development, but I do private consulting on a number of different areas in economics, including clean energy. And I am also a researcher at UNM these days, so I wear a lot of hats. But it's a great pleasure to be here with you in front of this committee. It's been a very long time, I think 12 years since I was here last. Next slide, please. There we go. So I was asked to be here today, I believe, because I did some work around economic analysis of the potential benefits of development of renewables. And I started this work in 2018 when I was approached by, well, let me back up a little bit. And I just want to clarify that my role in this process has been fairly minor. I was not really involved in passage of the ETA or development of the ETA at all. So I don't have expertise there. I came in later really to start talking about how to make the transition to renewables economically feasible for New Mexico and what that might look like in terms of jobs for New Mexicans. So I entered this process sort of on the back end once the PNM's proposals had gotten over to the PRC. So I started this work in 2018 at the behest of the San Juan Citizens Alliance, who approached me because there was, at that time, this was prior to the ETA's passage, there was a lot of conversation about what the closure of San Juan Generating Station would look like for the economies of the Four Corners area. And it was a very significant concern, remains a very significant concern, because as a number of the members have already noted, the impact of the transition away from coal has been very, very painful for households particularly in northwestern New Mexico. And I think that folks were cognizant of that was going to be an issue a couple of years ago when I started working on this. And I was brought in to sort of look at the possibilities that might exist for economic development around the transition to renewables. What kind of jobs could be created by the development of more solar resources in New Mexico? And I was then asked to do a second analysis after the conversation had progressed a little bit, to look specifically at how solar development in the area that was to be most impacted, that's the Central Consolidated School District and San Juan County, how solar development in those areas at or near the generating station site might help to offset the impact of the closure of the mine and the plant on tax beneficiaries in the area. Again, the public school district most specifically. Next slide, please. Great. So at that time, back in 2018, there was a very rigorous conversation about a generating station closure, but it really focused a lot on the negative economic impacts, which are undisputable, but there was not a real conversation about what economic strategies might be utilized to mitigate the impact on households. And what conversation there was going on focused a lot on finding new markets for coal or developing industries around fossil fuel derived products like petrochemicals. My objective in conducting these studies was really to broaden that discussion to include a wider variety of mitigation strategies, some of which were perhaps more environmentally friendly than finding new markets for coal or developing petrochemical manufacturing as an industry or a bigger industry in northern New Mexico. I also wanted to look at the potential long-term benefits of moving away from carbon dependence in northwestern New Mexico specifically, but more generally in New Mexico. In looking at the economy of the Four Corners region, one of the things that you see there are tremendous assets there in addition to the fossil fuel assets that have traditionally been powering the economy. And analysis of the economy suggests that the best strategy for moving forward would be to disinvest from coal and start looking at ways to better leverage the economic potential of the area's other resources, cultural assets, scenic assets, water, agriculture, things like that. Next slide, please. So this brings me to a conversation about fossil fuel industries in New Mexico, and I think that right now is this conversation is even more relevant than it was a couple of years ago. On one hand, fossil fuel industries, oil, gas, coal, have brought thousands of jobs and a large amount of revenue to both state and local governments in New Mexico. And there's no question about that. On the other hand, we have benefited greatly from the extractive industries in terms of tax revenue and job creation, but we haven't thought sufficiently, I believe, in what we have foregone in choosing to focus on and develop these industries. There is a significant evidence that, in fact, economies that are highly, highly reliant on extractive industries, not just fossil fuels, but timber might be another example, are slower to grow, and slower to diversify than economies that have a broader range of activities from which employment is derived in tax revenue. There's also research, quite a bit of research, in fact, that indicates that heavy reliance on fossil fuel extraction undermines long-term economic growth. There are studies that have compared countries and counties and states, both in the United States and internationally, have shown that those that are heavily dependent on extractive industries have lower levels of long-term economic growth, and that. And as I mentioned before, this has been demonstrated both at the international level in comparisons of countries, but also in studies that compare Western states and counties in the Western U.S. On the basis of whether they are carbon dependent or not, and look at indicators like income, employment, and population growth. So there's some indication that although our dependence on fossil fuels in New Mexico has been very beneficial in a lot of ways, that we have, in making that choice, and that we have foregone other opportunities for economic growth that we might not have even realized we were foregoing at the time. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So, and then I started to talk about this what's called the resource curse, and that's the term that's used by researchers, or what's also called the paradigm of plenty. The term that researchers use to refer to this phenomena that's observed in really resource-dependent economies. And there's been a lot of speculation as to why we see lower rates of long-term growth in resource-dependent economies. And although there's no definitive answer to that question, some of the answers that have been suggested are that when you have a strong resource foundation and a lot of employment in extracting resources, there may be less incentive for community members to pursue higher education, because there's a job that they know good job they know that they can get relatively quickly right out of high school. And perhaps there is also less incentive for business or government leaders to look at economic diversification, because the extractive industries are so beneficial to the economy. Another thing that I think we're really experiencing here in New Mexico right now, not just in northern New Mexico, but also in southeastern New Mexico, is that dependence on resource extraction makes you almost by definition dependent on global commodities markets to determine the future of your economy. And there, as I'm sure members of this committee are well aware, there's an art and science to predicting what will happen in commodities markets, and usually neither the art nor the science is sufficient to actually predict the future. But if you have a situation in which an economy is highly dependent on a resource that goes boom and bust and is completely outside the control of the local economy, there's going to be a certain inherent reluctance to invest, because there's so much uncertainty about what comes next. So I'm not just talking about investment in the resources themselves, but actually broader investment in the community. So that boom and bust cycle tends to discourage local investment. Again, when you have that ready access to abundant natural resources, there may be less incentive to transition to this more service-based, knowledge-based economy that the U.S. is certainly moving into. And last, but certainly not least, without a doubt, resource extraction has negative environmental consequences, and we can talk about the extent of those, but at a different time. But the extractive industries tend to grow, crowd out growth of other industries that are really dependent on environmental quality. So you have this tension in a lot of rural communities, both in New Mexico and elsewhere, between the extractive industries, which are the historical source of economic development, and these emerging industries of outdoor recreation and production of services and goods for the outdoor recreation industry. Those two sets of economic development objectives are not always consistent and are not always compatible. So by choosing extractive resources or relying on extractive resources, we may inadvertently be making it less likely that areas of the state can develop economies that do a better job of leveraging their other natural assets like clean air, clean water, uninterrupted vistas, outdoor recreation opportunities. Next slide, please. So going back to the study, the first study in the Four Corners area, some of my findings from that study were listed on this slide. And one is that investments in quality of life are key to sustainable economic development. That's not really an insight. I mean, from this study, it's really a broader insight that a good place to do business, a good place for economic development is first and foremost a good place to live. That quality of life and sustainable economic development are inextricably linked. The second finding is that leveraging local assets and prioritizing quality of life is probably the most reliably sustainable economic recovery strategy. I identified 3 areas in particular that I felt were very promising for the Four Corners region: better development of tourism and recreation, solar power generation and storage, as we discussed before, and mine reclamation and plant decommissioning as 3 areas to really look at as sources of job growth in the region post-coal. And again, the region's overarching development goal should be maximizing the return on investment in its assets in much the same way that the return on investment that extractive companies seek to maximize the return on investment in the resources they're pulling from the ground. We as a state should be looking at maximizing the return on investment in cultural, environmental, and recreational assets. With that same sort of, I guess, business perspective, that these really are as valuable assets. They're as valuable as the oil, gas, coal, copper that's coming out of the ground here. Coal-fired power and coal-fired power production are fairly inconsistent with the goal of developing an economy that really leverages recreational and environmental assets, because coal extraction and coal-fired power production are environmentally damaging, undermining population health as has been demonstrated, degrading the environment and the quality of the water. Conversely, we looked at the possibility of a utility scale photovoltaic installation in the Farmington area as not only a source of jobs, and we've discussed the short term versus the long term already, but a source of at least temporary jobs, and very consistent with the Farmington area's outdoor recreation industry initiative, which was developed to leverage the outdoor assets of the Four Corners region. Next slide, please. So, and now this slide pertains to the second study that I did following on that examination of economic development opportunities in the Four Corners region. a major issue that has already been touched on by previous presenters is the fact that the San Juan Mine and Generating Station Complex lies within the boundaries of three major property taxing jurisdictions: San Juan County, San Juan Community College, and the Central Consolidated School District. So all of these entities derive revenue from property taxes levied on the mine plant complex. And the closure of the mine and the plant are obviously going to remove those assets from the property tax rolls and decrease revenue to the beneficiaries. And, you know, that initially was used, I think, as an argument to keep the plant and the mine open. But one of my objectives was to say, okay, we understand and appreciate very much that there are entities that need this revenue to continue providing services, and we need to figure out how to maintain the value of the property in that area in order that these beneficiaries continue to receive revenue. But that doesn't necessarily require that the coal mine and the power plant continue to operate. Next slide, please. So we looked at the possibility of developing a solar installation at or near the San Juan Generating Station site as one way to replace at least some of the lost property values up there that would result from closure of the mine and the plant. We know that particular area is very, very well suited to be a major producer and exporter of energy, and not just any energy, but solar electricity. We also know, as has been touched on before, that solar plant construction is highly labor intensive and a good source of transitional employment. Now, again, it is transitional employment. We know that solar plant construction hires a lot of people, plant operation, not so much. With the size of the installations that were being considered, it was very likely that there would be 1 or 2 years, maybe probably closer to 2 years, of construction jobs in the area associated with developing the site for solar on a very large scale. We also know that unlike the coal industry, which has been declining quite markedly despite efforts in Washington to sort of prop it up, the solar industry is driving job creation. It's growing. Its growth was slowed a bit by the tariffs that were put in place by President Trump, but it has continued to grow. And we know that more people are now employed in the U.S. wind and solar industries than in the coal industry, and that employment in the solar industry has been growing pretty significantly in each of the past several years. There actually have been studies showing that the solar industry in the U.S. is growing fast enough to employ most of the workers displaced by the decline of coal. And there have also been studies demonstrating that many of the skills that coal miners have are skills that can be transferred to the renewables industry with some retraining. Next slide, please. So, stepping back to the purpose, to the title of this presentation, I was part of the first case that was brought before the PRC. The abandonment of San Juan Generating Station and the decision about which resources would be used to replace that coal-fired power were broken into two separate dockets by the PRC. And my study informed debate on the first docket around abandonment because it helped to present some alternatives. It wasn't an exhaustive survey, but it presents some alternatives as to how a transition to cleaner energy could be a vehicle for reemployment of displaced coal workers and could support the long-term health of the Four Corners economy. Understanding, and I never want to lose sight of the fact that in the short term, regardless of how diligent we are in trying to get resources to that community, there are going to be people and workers and families who are who experience a hardship as a result of the closure. I don't want to lose sight of that. But the idea behind looking at alternative sources of economic development was to think a little in the future and say, how can we make this transition as painless as possible and support long-term growth that will ultimately employ more people in the region? Next slide, please. So there were three ways the Energy Transition Act, or actually more than three, but three primary ways that I looked at that the Energy Transition Act made or expedited and smoothed the transition away from coal and towards renewables in the Four Corners area. And the first one was that the Energy Transition Act made funds available for reskilling or for retraining displaced coal miners and power plant workers into other occupations and industries, and supported training so that they could transition into new jobs. The ETA also established an apprenticeship program for the construction of new electric generation facilities. And of course, that enhanced renewable portfolio standard that's sort of a core element of the ETA is one way to really help ensure that there is a market for solar power in New Mexico, so that that development of solar power really is a potential economic driver. Obviously, by increasing the amount of renewables that must be, or increasing the amount of energy that must be derived from renewables, by definition, you drive the growth of the solar industry in New Mexico and drive job creation. Next slide, please. So then the second case was around replacement portfolios. And that was, so after the PRC decided, yes, we're going to approve abandonment and securitizations as anticipated through the ETA, they went on to say, okay, so now that we know that the plant's going to be abandoned, what is the right portfolio of resources to replace that power that was lost, that there's no longer being generated up there, or will no longer be generated up there? And the ETA set forth some very clear priorities about what that replacement portfolio needed to look like. There had to be some assets in the Central Consolidated School District. It had to minimize environmental impacts. It had to emphasize system reliability, and it had to be relatively efficient in terms of cost. And those were the priorities, again, set forth in the ETA. A number of stakeholders submitted potential portfolios of San Juan Generating Station replacement resources for consideration by the hearing officers in this case. And obviously PNM had a preferred portfolio, and a coalition of clean energy groups all had another proposed some portfolios as well. The one that was ultimately chosen by the hearing officers as to recommend for adoption by the PRC was 100% renewable portfolio that included 430 megawatts of solar and storage within the Central Consolidated School District, 450 megawatts of solar and storage in unincorporated McKinley County, and another 70 megawatts of solar and storage on Jicarilla Apache tribal lands in Rio Arriba County. So really spread out the replacement resources, but they're all solar or storage. Next slide, please. So we looked at, and again, I actually utilized the same data, I believe, that Sayuri was referencing in terms of data that came from the potential providers of the solar power, the companies that were sort of teed up to actually make this investment in New Mexico in terms of developing these assets on behalf of PNM. There was to be, or is to be, about a $500 million investment in McKinley County, an $80 million investment in Rio Arriba County, and a $447 million investment in the Central Consolidated School District. These data are primary data, but obviously as these projects evolve, these numbers will likely change to some degree, but it really gives you a sense of the magnitude of the investment. Next slide, please. And so we looked at the economic impacts of development of this 100% renewable replacement portfolio. As noted earlier, the construction phase is the phase during which most of the economic impacts of solar development are realized. The construction phase of those, really it's 4 projects in 3 separate locations. The construction phase of those projects was predicted to add over $500 million to New Mexico's gross state product. The reason you're not seeing the whole $1 billion is because a lot of money still leaves the state to purchase the equipment necessary. So we don't have a very well, I don't know that we have at all an industry that is actually building the components or manufacturing the components for solar installations. As a result, a fair amount of the investment goes right out of the state in order to purchase those components from out-of-state suppliers. However, despite that fact, there are a lot of people, New Mexicans, who are employed in building these projects. We estimated that would result in about 3,500 job years. Now, people talk about jobs, and when I think about jobs, I think about a job that lasts, for a significant period of time. When we're talking about these sorts of jobs, we really need to be talking about job years, because these are not permanent jobs. They're long-term temporary jobs, and we want to talk about them in terms of years of employment as opposed to total number of jobs. Note also that this job years number includes some part-time employment as well. $170 million in wages and salaries and other employee compensation for New Mexicans employed constructing these projects, and $52.3 million in new tax revenue for state and local taxing jurisdictions in New Mexico, assuming that they don't seek IRBs, because many renewables projects obtain IRBs, industrial revenue bonds, from the local governments that they are doing the project within the boundaries of, and that reduces the revenue to mostly the local taxing jurisdictions. But this estimate assumes that there are not IRBs at play. That's an important distinction to make. Next slide, please. Operations phase, again, it's much less labor intensive, but the jobs are permanent and they tend to be good. So $14 million in annual additions to gross state product, 55 permanent full-time jobs. Again, that's 4 different installations in 3 different places, and $8.1 million in annual new tax revenue for state, local, and tribal jurisdictions. Also worth noting that given the plans for going carbon-free by 2040, which is actually around the corner, solar plants are a better investment for the state of New Mexico, because we know that they will generate replacement tax revenue for the foreseeable future, whereas a natural gas plant, the future of a natural gas plant is very much in question after 2040, when these tighter renewable portfolio standards take place or take effect. And the next slide, please. And I've already touched on this. Commercial solar installations are not very labor intensive, but the training in solar specific technologies does provide a career ladder for folks who have maybe relatively little higher education, but and are employed in construction and labor jobs that want to rapidly increase their skills. And I'm looking at 2016 numbers, so this was several years ago, but in 2016, a non-residential solar PV technician earned a median annual salary of $61,580 a year. Now, that's not $80,000. It's not some of the higher wage jobs that were lost at the plant or the mine. However, these are not insignificant jobs. These are not minimum wage jobs. They are fairly high quality jobs, and many of them are permanent. So, although the closure of the plant and the mine are going to have negative short-term economic effects on the community, there are ways to mitigate that, and particularly over the long term, to move to a more sustainable approach to economic development, both in the Four Corners but also statewide, really, that subjects the economy to less volatility around the price of natural resources, and also creates and maintains a source of good paying jobs that are not going to be subject to those same vagaries of international commodities markets. Next slide, please. And that's it. I'm happy to stand for questions. And once again, I want to thank the committee for having me, and I'm very, very happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for the great presentation. A lot of good information, and certainly information that does, in fact, project significance to impact of ETA. I think certainly I can see you, Ms. O'Donnell. Noah is not. Noah, are you with us?
I am. Yeah, I just turned off my video during her presentation. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Again, thank both of you for excellent presentations. I would like to open this thing up for questions. Do we have any questions from members? I do have Ron Griggs, Senator Griggs, with his hand raised. Senator, do you have a question? Apparently not. Are there questions from
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I guess I left that on from last time. But one of the things I guess that I was, as I listened to some of Kelly's presentation, there's some things in there that I think we need to expand on, and unfortunately, I didn't take the notes I needed to take. But when you talk about the 55 jobs, and that are going to be good paying jobs, and they some of those jobs make $61,000, and a lot of the jobs that were lost made over $80,000, and a lot of the jobs where they might be located aren't even in the same places. So I think as we look through this stuff, we need to be really specific about how it applies to that part of the world, with the jobs that are being lost and the jobs that are replacing those. So, Mr. Chair, I just think that there's some specificity that I would have loved to have seen in some of that we didn't get, but maybe as we move forward, we'll be able to address those. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Griggs, for that comment. There was no question, but
Mr. Chair,
Ms. O'Donnell, if you would like to maybe respond to that.
Sure. I just wanted to thank Senator Griggs. It's very infrequent that I get asked for more details, because generally I'm accused of putting people to sleep with details. But I would be more than happy to share the details of my analysis and the data and the methodology with Senator Griggs at your convenience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. O'Donnell. I believe that Representative Chatfield has a question.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This question is also for Ms. O'Donnell. If the solar components are not manufactured in New Mexico, can you tell me where they are manufactured?
Yes and no, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Obviously, a lot of the solar components are manufactured in China, and I think that development of the ability to develop those sorts of do that kind of manufacturing here is probably going to be pretty key to energy security for the country going forward.
So I think all of those components, do they not involve mining of natural resources in order to build the components that are required to put in a solar facility?
Senator, yeah, I'm sure they do. Maybe not whole, but you certainly elements. Yeah, sure.
And secondly, there will be 55 jobs left permanently. How many permanent jobs? Well, they're no longer permanent. How many did we lose?
Senator, at the time that I did the analysis, there were 355 jobs between the plant and the mine. So those were the direct job losses at the time. Of course, depends on when you do the analysis, right? If we did it 2 weeks ago, there would have been a lot fewer. But at the time, it was 355.
So that's a considerable loss. And I'm, there's a lot of good things about renewable energy. I'm just bringing out a few of the hardships that are coming on the people there. And when we talk about tourism, every now and then I'm a tourist. I go off and I look at things and I see things that I enjoy doing, and wife and I enjoy doing that from time to time. But in the meanwhile, we produce something. We produce beef. We have a ranch. So I think that the real economy produces something. It produces beef or cars or photovoltaics components for your solar. So I think that the coal mine produced something. It produced energy, and it produced a lot of jobs. So I think that in order to be a tourist, you have to have a job, right? So in the end, you can't have your entire industry dependent on tourism, because somebody has to make money somewhere in order to be a tourist. It doesn't matter if they live in New Mexico or elsewhere. Eventually, it comes down to production. You have to produce something in order to be a tourist. And that's just a thought I'd like to leave you with. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was informative, and I enjoyed it. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much, Representative, for your question and for your comments. Are there any other individuals that would like to either have a question or would like to make a comment? Presenters, before we leave, I would like maybe to at least make a few comments. I don't know whether all the members of this committee got copies of the New Mexico Renewable Energy Transmission and Storage Study. I think what I'm looking forward to is the presentation that we will hear this afternoon from Rita. I think in part, a lot of the things that they share with you are quite similar, Ms. O'Donnell, to the information that you presented specific. And I think there's a lot to be said also about the presentation that Mr. Long made in regards to that. Let me just ask one question, and it probably is a relative minor question relative to the discussion. One of the things that was shared in terms of that report were indications about the geography of New Mexico as it pertains to wind and solar potentials. Ms. O'Donnell, and I know that you indicated that in order to dispense situation regarding a lot of detail, that probably would take up maybe the whole morning or maybe the whole day, that you would sort of dispense with doing that. But if I may ask, relative to wind and solar potentials, are those present in the Four Corners area? And how are they relative to other areas of New Mexico?
Mr. Chairman, the answer to your question, the first question is yes, there are wind and solar potentials in the Four Corners area, and there are maps that demonstrate that. They are particularly with this. I mean, I'd have to defer to an engineer on this, so I don't even really want to speculate that much. I know that that there are better solar values in certain other parts of the state. There's no question about that. But that does not mean that the Four Corners is without natural resources in terms of wind or solar. There were, involved in the discussions before the PRC were a number of engineers who talked specifically about that. My side of the equation is more the economics. Once you have the engineering part cleared away, and taken care of, what would the economic impact of a given project be? But I'm not the person to talk to about where to build your plant necessarily. That's one for the engineers.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, if I can just chime in, I happen to serve on the board of RITA, and I know you'll be getting a lot more detail of that analysis from Fernando Martinez, the executive director, later in the day. But I think he will share that New Mexico is blessed with incredible solar and wind resources. I think third best among states for solar resources in the country, and 12th for wind. And as Ms. O'Donnell is correct in saying that Four Corners is not the best part of the state for either resource, but when you're not the best part of an excellent state, there's still some resources to be had. And the other real advantage of the Four Corners area, particularly for solar, is the existence of really significant transmission resources. And I can just tell you from my experience on RITA, only just for these last couple of years, building new transmission is an extraordinary challenge everywhere in this country. It's one that we have to rise to meet in this state and everywhere else because of the need for grid modernization and the need to tap these clean and very economic resources that we have here in the state. But when you have existing resources, you're crazy not to use them. So putting resources, whether it's storage or solar, right there in the Four Corners where we have really significant transmission coming down into the primary population centers of our state, but also heading west out through Arizona into California, where we can sell that resource, makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Long, thank you very much for the comment. And I think in part the situation regarding transmission, as we will hear this afternoon, is a significant issue. There are articles out there that maybe refer to transmission as the Trojan horse in this whole process. And it's for the challenges that you have indicated that we have. And certainly Four Corners area is prepared relative to the matter of transmission. That certainly is a real definite plus. It probably does point to the fact as to why that, in terms of existing resource, why that might be most certainly one thing to think about. I will make just one more general comment, and I think in part, again, it may very well pertain maybe to the presentation from both of you, and it is a comment, not necessarily requiring any response. I think part of what we do and some of the challenges that I have as a legislator are centered around qualitative value, or what I might refer to as the qualitative value of whatever action I take as a legislator, and also the quantitative value of what I undertake as a legislator. I think in part, some of what I'm hearing relative to the presentation, and I wouldn't expect it to be any different, is a significant amount of information relative to qualitative kind of measures. And I understand why that is significant and why that's important. I think New Mexico, both of you probably are fully aware of this, that as we analyze legislation, a lot of times we focus in on what we call static analysis. what's the potential impact relative to existing resource versus what is possible for the future, which would be dynamic analysis. So in that, there's a challenge, for example, that we have to kind of balance as we look at this. And again, just a matter of a statement on my part relative to the kind of challenges, for example, that I or any policymaker might have in regards to the items that we talk about. From the perspective of the committee, I would like to thank both of the presenters. The presentation was phenomenal. And again, I think many of us probably would, under a scenario, like to have maybe conversations directly with you. And I hope both of you are available for that. And I'm assuming that we can always, through our staff, either Tom or Aaron, and maybe other staff members, they can provide or get contact information from you that would be useful to share with the committee. But again, thank you very much, and thank you, committee members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee, and an honor to be here with Ms. O'Donnell.
Thank you very much for that. Members of the committee, as far as this morning's agenda is concerned, we are done with the agenda. It's only 11:15. I don't know, Tom, whether there would be anything specific relative to how we proceed forward. Certainly, there's nothing wrong with actually recessing at this point in time with the idea that we would be back at 12:30. Tom, do you have anything to comment on relative to a possibility of recessing now and then being back at 12:30?
Yeah, I think we can recess. I think we're coming back at, yeah, we can come back at 12:30. That's fine. Just a quick announcement. I sent a reminder in the chat. The deadline to submit draft legislation for consideration by this committee is going to be November 13th. And with that, I think, yeah, Representative Salazar, if you want to call the meeting now until take a break until 12:30, I think that sounds good.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that. I think, again, we will recess now and we will be back. Yes, go ahead.
This is Senator Martinez. I believe Chairman Candelaria wanted us to review and approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Oh, yes. Yes, he did mention that as a possibility of something to do after the first item on the agenda. We did not do that. So again, I would entertain motion to that effect.
I so move. I second.
Do we have the motion relative to the approval of the minutes of the last meeting? And it was
motion was done by Representative Rebecca Valero.
Second by Senator Padilla.
Do we have that? Do we have that, Tom? Your record?
Yes, we've got it.
Thank you very much for that, Senator Martinez. Appreciate it tremendously. So we will then see you folks at 12:30. Thank you very much for that.